curious.
I'm curious. I am curious. Curious.
By nature.
Welcome to Curious by Nature. I'm Jessica Johnson from Newswise. Sports psychologists often examine the high-pressure, high-performance demands of professional athletes, partly because sports provide a natural laboratory to study the effects of failure on the human psyche. Our guest today studies sports as a place where mistakes happen constantly, pressure never lets up, and resilience is the skill that separates those who burn out from those who thrive. By studying this environment, he hopes to use science to help people develop resilience in the face of adversity. His work bridges research and practice, studying how athletes, musicians, pilots, and other high performers can develop emotional control and bounce back stronger from setbacks. From Olympic competition to weekend matches, his research reveals how resilience is built, why it matters at every level of sport, and how its benefits extend far beyond the game into everyday life. Dr. Gupta, welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Hi, my name is Sahen Gupta. I hold a doctorate in sport and performance psychology from Glasgow Caledonian University, and I'm currently a senior lecturer in applied sports psychology at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. I am curious about in my professional life how people get past the stuff that is not so nice, and things which are not perfect happen all the time in all our lives. And that's where my research on resilience and that's where my work with athletes as an applied sports psychologist is all about.
So maybe tell me more broadly what you do and about your work overall.
So my day to day has two main parts of it, I would say. I would hope it's 50-50. It's not always. I am a researcher and I also teach masters and doctoral students mostly in applied sports psychology. And that's where I continue investigating how to make people more emotionally controlled and resilient to high pressure situations with athletes and other high performers like military, Airbus pilots and ATC controllers and musicians and dancers face. And in the other side, I'm a HCPC, which is one of our regulatory bodies, like the AMA in the US, registered chartered psychologist. So I work with clients on a day-to-day basis and try to blend the two insights together. So what I do in research, I try to apply, and what I find is the gap when we are working with the actual people. I try to circle it back and inform how to investigate more and how to understand better.
What is resilience?
Well, resilience comes from a word which in Latin means to leap back. You know how you have a rubber band or something very bouncy in that sense, like a spring. And that's where it came from. And when applied to human beings and the things that we see, do, and adjust to in daily life, it's about experiencing the things which are painful, which are disappointing, which really put a hit on us, and applying our emotional, mental approach to then bounce back to where we were. And this process itself takes time. It is something people learn how to do. You know, how we almost figure out our fashion taste, it takes a bit of time to figure it out, and how to then come back into the process of being okay once again, or as close to okay, or even better than okay that we can be.
How does resilience affect sports performance?
Well, the best part is sport is a natural laboratory for failure. You fail all the time. You fail on the score line. You fail when you're trying to make a pass. You fail when you have actually lost a game, a season, a championship. Even before you get to the elite sport, you fail pretty much every time you are on the field. Sport is one of those beautiful things which you're never quite perfect at. In fact, it exists in the midst. So, as a natural laboratory of failure, individuals who don't know how to overcome that failure, how to leap back, as it were, how to bounce back from that adversity of failure, can't sustain themselves in a well-being oriented way in sport. Because imagine this, you're playing a sport, pick any sport, let's say basketball, golf, football, whatever, and you're not being perfect in a training session. It happens. Your passes aren't quite getting where it should be. You're missing open shots, and that's a failure. And then you're stuck up on it. You get angry, and you get miserable, and then you're sulking all the time. Maybe you have an emotional outburst. Okay, fine. But if next training session tomorrow morning, you haven't had the ability to be resilient to your failure to be at your best today, tomorrow you're likely going to continue that downward slope onwards. And eventually you will burn out and give up sport altogether. So resilience in the first level is key to keep people in sport. And then at the elite level is to make them continue their optimal levels of performance despite whatever is going on around them.
So recently, there was the tennis open at Roland Garros with Coco Gauff and Sabalenka. A lot of people criticized her about her negativity, and it seemed to me, I really like her. I think she's a great player, but of course I like Coco Gauff as well. But but what would you advise Sabalenka in that case about what she should do? Would resilience have been something, if she had better resilience, would she have been able to possibly come back better from that game?
Well, firstly, tennis is a very interesting sport in and of itself because by the rules of the game, you're winning and losing every time. There's a point. There's no draw. There's always a binary outcome. And by the nature of the sport, theoretically, tennis can go on till infinity because if no one gets 2 points in a row, you can continue going on. So this is a great example of two types of adversity. One, you have short, acute adversity, which is moment to moment, clearly defined, winning and losing a point, winning a break point, losing a break point, hitting a bad shot, hitting a good shot, and losing a point sometimes. And then you have a more prolonged, acute type of thing, which goes on for a period of time where you're being put under a lot of pressure over more than a couple of hours, minimum, right? In that time, one of the big misconceptions is that things are rosy when the back stuff is going on. But resilience is about, in many ways, being able to withstand it. And Sabalenka had a lot of, even Gauff had a few moments where things were about to sort of go off in that sense. And when you look at the research behind it and also how we help athletes be resilient in those moments, emotional ability to regulate is one of the biggest things. And everyone has their own temperature almost that they function best at. For some people, letting off steam in that moment is the most important thing. For others, when they go and let off the steam too early, then it just keeps building up more and more and more. You know, some players just keep shouting and keep sort of going on that spiral. So just expressing the negative emotions is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it may be if you're only stuck in that and you can't get out of that into what we call the behavior trajectories. Because at the end of the day, you have to fix certain things which aren't working, or at least try your level best to. Sometimes your opponents don't make that possible. And that's where that emotion to the behavior connection is super important.
Can you tell me about your recent research study about resilience in sports?
We have found that how sporting resilience develops is like an engine. You know, as you run the engine, the car sort of keeps going and trundling forward. Sometimes you need to put a bit of extra throttle just to make it go through a tough terrain, and sometimes you can just cruise off nice and easy on a highway and a motorway. Is quite nice. So where does an engine come from and what is it built of? The first thing is your antecedent. It's the arc of the engine. So your antecedent is a complicated word of what has happened before and what's worked and not worked before. Individuals who are aware, and this is where psychologists like me help and work with individuals to make them aware, individuals who are aware of what has worked and, more importantly or equally importantly, what has not worked, can choose to do more of obviously what has worked and less of what has not worked. You'd think that this is a very easy thing to do for most people, but because our lives have so many moments which we might not have the time, especially in today's world, to stop and think about it, sometimes it gets a bit tricky to do that. Now, once this antecedent or the previous parts of it comes in, it determines what we do now. So a simple example is we all have different spice tolerance levels, right? And if you go into a restaurant and they ask, okay, do you want it very spicy or do you not? If you don't have a reference point of how spicy that restaurant spice is and how much you can tolerate that spice or your spice level, you're probably going to order something either too bland or too spicy for you to handle. But imagine a situation where you are effective enough to know your levels and then you can manipulate your response to the situation accordingly.
Can you tell me what are the three components of the arc and also how resilience develops?
Absolutely. So the first one is antecedents. So the things which has happened before right now. So the things which have worked for you, things which have not worked for you. The three key questions there is the person aware of it? If they are aware of it, have they implemented it? And if they have implemented it, are they implementing it consistently? That's the antecedents. And the next part is the response. Considering in a good situation, they are implementing what they have learned, they can respond to a situation. Every situation is different, every success is different, every failure is different. That is where the connection of the A and the R, the antecedent and the response is. Now, every behavior we do have intended and unintended consequences, which is the C. So what I know or what I have done, what I am doing in response to what I am facing now will have a consequence tomorrow after what we are dealing with today is over. That is the arc. And the C, or the consequence, the good, bad, the average, middled out, whatever it may be, feeds back into what was the original previous experience for the next time a similar problem comes around.
Can you give me an example of that? Maybe in a famous example of someone that we know or something that has happened recently?
We can take several examples. Let's take golf, for example. Rory McIlroy's famous win earlier this year in the Masters. Rory McIlroy has been one of those prodigies of golf for best part of a decade now, and yet that was probably one of the only tournaments which always eluded him. So if we assume that he's played the Masters course at Augusta 10 times, I think he's played it way more than that, but assume he's played it for 10 years. Every time he hasn't come out of it knowing that my goals were this and I haven't achieved it, it's a failure, right? Because every competitive athlete, especially Rory McIlroy, would have gone on to try to win the Masters for that famous jacket. So every year he would have gone back and built up his antecedents because, okay, this is what happened last year. This year I responded to this in this way. And that's the consequence of what happened. And next year the arc is stronger and then it's stronger. So then you learn on the go. It's that ability to be dynamic and it's that ability to constantly develop from that. And this year, if you think about it, he didn't have the perfect day by any stretch of the imagination. But because he was resilient in the moment to back his strength, back his ability to play his best game when the situation was really stacked against him, showed that even in that moment, his resilience engine was so strong that he could ride that. And then, well, he was on to clear road after that.
What are some of the things that really are the antecedents for people to be able or athletes to be able to be prepared for?
One of our previous research works, we looked into this a little bit and we found that every adversity that we experience is sort of met with our own defense system a little bit. So the best example that I can use is like a filter. So, when you make tea and you have to filter out, or you're making pasta and you have a pasta strainer, right? So the wider the strainer is, the more the tea leaves get through and into your tea, and it messes it up a little bit. And the finer it is and the stronger the filter is, the more it catches stuff in, right? So keeping that visual in mind, we have 4 or 5 key things which strengthens that filter or strengthens your defense system, as it were. One of the biggest contributors is the ability to look at a situation as a challenge instead of a threat. So for example, I am losing this point. That is a fact. Maybe you are losing this point. Which means if I look at it as a threat, I am losing this point will slowly balloon into, I will probably lose this match. But rather than that, mentally resetting in that moment and looking at, I'm losing this point, which means I can probably try something to turn the tide towards me. That's the way to challenge appraisal. The second one is perceived or tangible social support. What this means is social support that you know you can access. It doesn't need to be something you access. Even knowing that I have a coach and a friend and a partner and a family who will be there to help me if I need it turned out to be one of the biggest sources of strength of that ability to be resilient for difficult situations. The next one was the ability to figure out control or controllable elements in a situation. Most of the times, we are faced with endless possibilities about what is about to happen. And we often think that we can't manage to influence any part of the situation, right? So the really resilient people can, in that moment, step back, look at that situation, or almost to make a mind map out of it, and go, I can control this part and this part, so I'm going to try to do this too. I can't control all of that, so I'm going to sort of push it aside for now. A lot of people who are not that much resilient in their responses struggle with figuring out that identifying part. Those are three main and key parts of it.
Are there tests that assess an individual's resilience?
Yes, actually, that was the final part of my research project where I worked and I collaborated with a lot of athletes, coaches, organizations as much as I could around the world to get a large sample size of about 15 plus countries and athletes in sports to develop a measure of resilience, to try to see all of these elements. How can we actually measure it? It's called the ADAPTAR scale, which is the positive adaptation and resilience in sports scale. It is a scientifically validated measure, so that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is using what we called life story narratives to do that. So one of the things we did with athletes during COVID, because that was a big adversity, it was macro. You couldn't control it. We've all lived through it, got weird days all around. But for athletes, especially Olympic and high-level athletes, we have to remember that the Olympic Games, which was about to happen in August 2020, was cancelled in March 2020. And what this meant that by the time Tokyo eventually happened in 21, a lot of the athletes had to go through reselection and all of that. It was a massive thing. So we tracked the narrative experiences of those athletes around that. We had about 12 athletes at the elite level and how they were responding to it. So in that way, that point you made about that flexibility versus rigidity came out really well, because one of the key narratives was loss of structure, was a loss of identity, was a loss of plan, and for some of them, the loss of opportunity. Because for some sports, athletes were not of a very high socioeconomic background, so they couldn't train. But others who were of a very high socioeconomic background could, even in that lockdown period. So when they were back into selection processes, the athlete who was better off, who couldn't train because the factors out of them were not as good, and they were really finding it difficult. So to map that narratives in the past and then try to build up how it went from there is another great way of mapping how people are resilient.
Don't most sports that children would be involved in provide that level, that amount of kind of training for resilience?
Well, yes and no. So when we look at youth sport, and rightly so, youth sport often has a highly scaffolded approach. So we are scaffolding them through every step of the way. And because participation is one of the biggest things, the competitive part of it has a lot of soft landings in that sense, which is good as well. But think of an athlete who goes from, let's say, a system where in soccer, you don't count goals at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, right? You're playing for the fun of it, the focus that the coach is debriefing on. Oh, we learned how to pass with the outside leg. How many times did you do that? Which is great, which is process oriented and all of that. But we find out of that 20 kids in a, let's say, geographical area, 2 or 3 of them progress on to as serious, high level, more professional training, right? Because they want to become footballers as professionals. Now imagine they go to a setup which is quite high level. and they've turned 15 and 16. And for the first time in their life, they're getting exposed to things like stats. How many misses have you had? How many this have you had? It's so overwhelming because in that level, your support, which you're used to, let's say at 90 out of 100, has gone probably down to 30. And the difficulty and the challenge and the pressure in that sense has gone from a 30 onto a 90. So it's that balance that you have to figure out a way. And that's why we have to actively work with coaches, and we do, to create that environment as well as that supportive journey.
Does resilience in sports translate into resilience in life?
100%. I am, that is one of the projects which I eventually want to do in a more timeline, let's say 2 years down the line, what will happen kind of thing. It's one of my, it's still on the idea board as it were, but I think it is almost as certain as anything that it will translate, because we see that the experiences from youth sport translate into other things. So we have a lot of research which says that athletes who participate in young athletes who participate in organized competitions, training, and all of that have better time management skills, are better in pressure situations of evaluation like job interviews and like presentations. They have better social skills because they are forced to problem solve together as a group. And I think all of those things apply in life as well. If you can figure out how to get over something which you've invested, let's say 6 months of your life, and it didn't work out, didn't win it, maybe you didn't even qualify for the finals. Eventually you get, if you are willing, if your arc process is strong enough, you then come back into applying some of that in life as well.
So, how could someone listening to this podcast see and kind of test their own levels or get an understanding of where they are? What is their baseline of resilience?
Well, there's a very fun, very simple activity which I'd like to suggest to all the listeners. Just take a blank piece of paper, okay? And in that blank piece of paper, think about the last 5 years, okay? Well, let's think about the last four. Let's leave COVID out of this, okay? And think about the most difficult things that you've had to do in that period, and just write a sentence on that. For example, I had to come back from an injury, or I had to recover after a breakup with a partner, or whatever it may be. Just write down one sentence, pick. And once you've done all the five, try to turn the page, put down the 1 to 5 bullet points again, and then write the 3 things which helped you come out of it over a period of time, or if it's recent, if you are still coming out of it. And in a bracket, just say if you were successful or not in a percentage. Let's say you've fully gotten over your ex and you've fully recovered from an injury. All good, no problems. I'm over it 100%. Right? And maybe the 3 things which helped you get over the injury was having a brilliant physio who was very openly in communication with you, having the ability to control your own schedule so that you can get your training and development needs, and maybe having, let's say, a coach or a sports psychologist who always kept you on the right track in terms of your mind space and how you were thinking about it. Let's say these 3 things, and 100%. So that would be a very easy activity. It's a very nice, fun activity in there, and then we can figure it out. Literally little patterns.
If people can maybe look at it as a way to strengthen themselves, I guess, psychologically, right? And mentally, that can help them also in their life. But they need to, though, have the boundaries of not getting too maybe stressed and taking it too far, because they really don't have there isn't probably the same, there isn't the economic motivation or failure. Like, they're not losing anything majorly, right? And
Exactly. I would say turn it into a way where, think of it as that if I then go overboard, I'm losing my enjoyment from the sport, and that's probably the biggest loss. And I'm not saying don't be annoyed. I'm last person to say don't be annoyed, because when I'm not doing well, I'm annoyed as well. Everyone's annoyed. That's okay. But when you're out of it, why was I playing that sport? Oh, I was just playing that sport because I like it.
But maybe that's also a level of resilience then. Maybe that's the next step is I'm annoyed. So why am I getting annoyed? I can calm down, I can relax, and I can learn to be resilient in that way.
Remember the antecedents, the ARC's A. Oh, I'm annoyed today. Why was I annoyed last time? Oh, I'm annoyed for the same reason. Okay. Why is this bugging me repeatedly? And that's your response. They're asking yourself, why is this particular thing really annoying me repeatedly? And then your consequence from that is to go back. Like, I'll give a simple example. I play golf as a consequence of all my other sports, but I don't go out as much as I really should to get better. And if I worked on something for, let's say, I've gone to the driving range 3 times that week and I worked on a specific thing. So I will only get annoyed if I know that that specific thing isn't working because I've put in the extra work on it. But if the other thing isn't working, I'm not bothered. I'm like, oh, it's fine. I didn't work on that. I don't expect it to be good. And some people actively learn new skills. So if you're bothered about something you're working hard on, have the antecedent awareness of this is reason. So your response is changed. And as a consequence, you can manage yourself a bit better as well.
It's interesting though how really resilience changes with ages and like it's kind of what's the point of it? The point changes. But it's still like a muscle it's healthy for you to build, but it's like letting go a little bit.
Yes, I think one of the things most people struggle with around resilience is that sometimes the most difficult thing is to accept that it was just a bad day.
Or someone is like that there's a change in someone's body and that they can't continue to play like they used to, or they are no longer an elite athlete.
Exactly. And you look at it and sometimes you may have played the best game in that entire year and you still haven't won. There's 2 ways to look at it. One, you could be absolutely livid with yourself for the entirety of the week. Why am I so unlucky? No, you can catastrophize on that. Or after you've cooled down, you can go, you know what? I should be proud of the level I played at. And fair play, they beat me. And that's harder to say than that. Sometimes it might be something absolutely weird. Like I once worked with the cricket, and cricket has a bat, kind of like baseball. He was playing in a selection match, and his bat broke, of all things. And he got caught out. And he just looked at that bat, and at that moment later on, he told me, I was just laughing because there's nothing more to do. I was just like, okay, this is just, I can't do anything more. So it's just that letting go has different reasons across different parts of life, but definitely also something to look at.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.